Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear viewers. I am Dr. Muhammad Usman, Professor of Physiology, and today we will learn about dead space. So, we will see its definition, we will discuss the types of the dead space, the factors which affect the dead space, its advantages and disadvantages, and how we can measure dead space. So, by definition, dead space is the portion of the inspired air which does not take part in the gaseous exchange process. There are two types of dead space, that is anatomical dead space and physiological dead space. Anatomical dead space is the volume of the conducting airways. Before the respiratory bronchioles, there is just conducting portion of the airways, as you can see in this figure. So, when we inspire tidal volume, that is 500 ml, only 350 ml reaches the gas exchange areas, okay, these below gas exchange areas, and the rest 150 ml remains in the conducting airways. So, this is the conducting part where 150 ml air remains. Because this 150 ml, it does not take part in the gas exchange process, so it is called dead space. Then the next type is physiological dead space, and it is equal to anatomical dead space and alveolar dead space. Now, normally you know that there is no alveolar dead space because all the alveoli are normally functional. So, normally anatomical and physiological dead spaces are equal, but in certain diseased conditions there are some non-functional alveoli. So, in case physiological dead space becomes more than the anatomical dead space. Now, which factors affect the dead space? There are certain factors which increase the dead space, like old age, in which it slightly increases, standing posture, deep inspiration, and when a person breathes through a long tube, for example in anesthesia. Now, please note that it remains unchanged in the shallow breathing. Then there are certain factors which decrease the dead space, and the most important one is tracheostomy. Now, let us discuss various advantages and disadvantages of the dead space. Its biggest advantage is that it takes part in the conditioning of air. The main complication of the tracheostomy, for example infection or dryness, they result from the absence of the dead space. And its disadvantage is that there is difficulty in removing the expired gases, because when we expire, dead space air is first removed and then air from alveoli is removed. Now, let us see how we can measure the dead space. A subject is asked to take a deep breath of oxygen. Now, this fills the entire dead space with pure oxygen. Okay, this fills the entire dead space with pure oxygen. Now, some oxygen it also mixes with the alveolar air, but it does not of course completely replace that air. Now, the person expires through a rapidly recording nitrogen meter, which makes this record as is shown here. Now, the first portion, this portion of the expired air, it comes from the dead space region where the air has been completely replaced by oxygen. Therefore, in this early part of the record, only oxygen appears and the nitrogen concentration is 0 here. But as the alveolar air begins to reach the nitrogen meter, then the nitrogen concentration also starts to rise, because the alveolar air contains normally large amounts of nitrogen. After still more air has been expired, all the dead space air has been washed from the passages and only alveolar air remains. Therefore, the recorded nitrogen concentration, it reaches a plateau level. Now, the gray area, this gray area, it represents the air that has no nitrogen in it, and this area is a measure of the dead space volume. And by using this equation, that is dead space Vd is equal to gray area multiplied by Ve, where V is the total volume of expired air, divided by pink area plus gray area. Okay. So, this one is gray area and this one is pink area. We can calculate the dead space. Assume that gray area on this graph is 30 square centimeter and the pink area in this graph is 70 square centimeter, and the total volume expired is 500 ml. Now, by using this equation and putting the values, we can calculate that volume of the dead space is about 150 ml. Thank you for watching today's video. Stay blessed and Allah Hafiz.